Welcome to another fast-moving episode of Canzano and Wilner, the podcast or videocast, depending on where you are listening or watching. I'm Jon Canzano. You can find my work at joncanzano.com. He's Jon Wilner. You can find him at wilnerhotline.com. Wilner, let's jump right in. We got a bunch of things to get to, including the college football playoff and the Pac-12 update and kickoff times. But can we start with Mike Leach? The College Football Hall of Fame had previously set up a criteria that you had to win 60% of your games, a 600 win percentage. Mike Leach met all of the criteria except that. He's at 596 is I think where he's at after winning that Egg Bowl in his last game. And so they've lowered it from 600 to 595. Yes. What was your immediate reaction when you saw that?
It's the Mike Leach rule. It has to be, right? You can make a case because anything, if you're 595, you just round up. But there was no rounding up with the way they did it previously, and this effectively accounts for anybody in that range where you would round up to 600.
Yeah,
I kind of think to do it.
Yeah, but I kind of think like maybe the criteria should be above 500 because there are cases where coaches who go maybe into a blue blood program who where have a ton of resources, have a lot of opportunity to win games and collect a bunch of 9 and 10 win seasons are going to be at an inherent advantage over a guy like Leach who went to work at Texas Tech and Washington State and Mississippi State. None of those schools had consistent winning before he got there. He created an uptick in success at all of them. Yep. And then also, you look at, just the contributions, the overall contributions to the game, and you see kind of his offensive influence on even a guy like Lincoln Riley at USC and other places around college football. And so I think you have to acknowledge that the guy mattered. I also think he would have been amused at the idea of them lowering their standard to let him clear it. He would have found that absurd and had something to say about it. Yeah.
No doubt. I think they still have an issue. There's still really good coaches that fall into the category that you just described. I mean, I don't think Howard Schnellenberger, who built the Miami dynasty, is in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Because of that winning percentage. So it's good to see that they adjusted. They probably need to do a little bit more tweaking. But Leach, the guy should be a first ballot, right? Yeah. Given the air raid is the dominant offensive system, starting at 7-on-7, high school, college, it's now all over the NFL, and he is largely responsible for it. Even if his winning percentage were below 500, you could argue that the impact on the game that he's had would still make him a Hall of Famer.
It caused me to go back and look at my text exchanges with Leach. And so I went back and I started.
You still have them, huh?
Scrolling through them. I can't delete it. I can't do that. Like Bill Walton voicemail messages, sure. Mike Leach text messages. I don't know if maybe our viewers can tell us in the comment section, do they have voicemails and text messages that they just don't have the heart to delete? And I went back and I scrolled through them, Wilner, and I published some of them. I don't think he would have minded. I found just sort of his comments on Larry Scott and his comments on Republicans and Democrats, and he just had some really interesting takes. And I went ahead and I put those out today, at joncanzano.com because he would have had something to say about this. And by the way, if he loses that Egg Bowl, so he coaches this game, it's a 24-22 game. They hold off Ole Miss at the end.
Yep.
Let's just say Ole Miss kicks a field goal to beat him, 25-24. His win percentage would be at 592. So I got to think that the Hall of Fame would have lowered it to 590 to allow him to get in, So what are we talking about here? Just acknowledge that there are some cases where, if you and I were coaching at Georgia or Alabama, we could get a 60% win percentage.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Right. Absolutely. They had to do it. It's good that they did it. And I don't know what the voting schedule is, but I believe he will be eligible in the next
2027. 2027.
Okay.
That'll be he'll be in that class. So he should be.
Yep. Absolutely. First ballot. So that was, it's incredible how busy things are in college sports right now. We got a holiday week and there's news flying left and right. We had the Leach news, and this morning at about the same time as the Leach news, the conference has announced all the early season kickoff times and TV networks, and and also Friday games throughout the season. And that, to me, it's always interesting to see who's getting what assignment, which schools are more, are most coveted, but for the networks, for the early season games, who's going to be on streaming only, who's playing at 9, who's playing on Friday. A lot going on.
Yeah, you could kind of see the picture of that Friday night, which used to be, the Pac-12 fans back in the day would look at the Friday night games, go, oh, we don't want to play that Friday night game. Well, you're getting a bit of a showcase now on that Friday night. It's also interesting to kind of see where maybe the future of the Pac-12's media deal will fit with some of the late Friday night windows and late Saturday night windows. So I kind of was looking at that. What else jumped out at me, Wilner, was Penn State announcing that their game on September 27th against Oregon will be the whiteout game.
Yes.
So last year I think they reserved that for Washington. Now they're going to give Oregon a baptism there at Penn State.
That'll be a fantastic environment for the Ducks, no doubt about that. I did notice that there are fewer Big Ten conference games on Friday night this year, and I think part of that is because this is getting a little bit into the weeds. I won't get too deep, but there are certain years when there are 14 Saturdays in the regular season and certain years when there are 13. If it's 14, then everybody's got 2 byes. That's the case this coming fall. And if you have teams if every team's got to have 2 byes, you can end up with some light Saturdays, right? There's some weeks where the Big Ten only has 5 or 6 conference games. If you move one of those games to a Friday, there's not a whole lot of inventory there for your TV partners.
Yeah.
So I think that was part of it. Last year, the Big Ten had 9 conference games on Friday nights. This year, it's only 5. And none of the West Coast schools have more than 1.
Yeah.
In fact, UCLA doesn't have any. But I think next year, when it's a 13 Saturday calendar, we're going to see a bunch more Big Ten games on Friday nights.
Yeah. So what do you think ESPN and Fox are going to do in that window? I mean, does it now become a Big 12 scenario? Is there some Mountain West games that get bigger showcase? What happens there? Because the network,
a few Mountain West games are on FS1, and there's a couple of Big 12 conference games are on either ESPN or the Fox networks on Fridays, but it's not that many.
Yeah.
And partly, too, Fox has got the MLB playoffs. Yeah. And remember last year, there was a World Series Game 1 in L.A., and then USC had a home game at 8 o'clock that night. And the Fox is not doing that this year. There will be no Friday night games on the West Coast following MLB baseball at 5 o'clock. So that's a different strategy, too. But I think going forward, Friday night is a huge window. And like you mentioned, Pac-12, their new TV deal, it's certainly possible that Fox will want to put some games on, 7:30, 8 o'clock as a part of a doubleheader for Friday nights.
Yeah. And look at what ESPN did. They grabbed that, opener with Oregon State and Cal. They also, they grabbed 2 games that they plan to put on in those late windows. And so, look, if I'm the Pac-12, I'm leaning hard into the Pac-12 after dark branding and trying to, create a little bit of space and a little visibility. As we've talked about, it's more about visibility and less the money's game changing, and the money doesn't seem like it's going to be game changing. So take that platform on the Friday and Saturday night in that late Pacific time zone window and go win with it.
Yep. Another interesting piece is that this coming season, the Big 12 will have games sub-licensed to Turner. So both Arizona and Arizona State have games on TNT early in the season. And you certainly wonder, is Turner going to be interested in acquiring more college football because they're losing the NBA? And is that a potential avenue for the Pac-12's new deal?
Yeah, we keep hearing they're kicking the tires. So if they're kicking the tires, they're obviously going in a little bit with this licensing stuff. That kind of pivots us nicely into what's going on with the Pac-12. What have you heard?
Going on?
Yeah, what have you heard? What's the update?
Well, I did see, I haven't heard a whole lot. They're really good at keeping the mediation, no leaks in the mediation. But San Diego State Athletic Director J.D. Wicker, there is a video on X of him talking to donors.
While it's, none of this is moving as quickly as I would like it to move for us to get the answers that we want. Very pleased with where we are from a Pac-12 standpoint. Obviously, we have to add another team. That will happen. TV, I have a good idea of what our TV is going to look like with the Pac-12. Right now we're trying to wrap up various items around that, but we have a really good idea of what that's going to be, and we're pleased with what that is going to be. From a Mountain West Conference mediation standpoint, as we talked about our exit fees, we did have Mountain West Conference mediation that was publicly announced. It was last Monday, a week from last Monday, or this past Monday. That continues to progress. So a lot of, feels like the next, what are we at? We're May 27th. The next 4 or 5 weeks, there's a lot that's going to happen that's going to help dictate what we're doing moving forward. So
everybody is under very strict orders, as we've discussed, about talking about details of the mediation. He said it's progressing. I don't know. I just know they have till July 15th when the stay ends. What are you hearing?
Well, here's a question I have for you, because, I try to read some of what the other reputable reporters are reporting out there, and there's a lot of noise that's out there from people who don't know what's going on, who are just speculating and throwing things out. But, I guess I would ask you, at what point do you become concerned for the Pac-12 that, there has not been an announcement on expansion. There has not been an announcement on a media rights deal. I think we all can kind of surmise that this mediation has caused at least a pause on those fronts with the announcements while they figure out the other stuff. But at what point is it the July 15th date for you? Because then you're kind of inside of a year at that point.
Yep. I've even seen the Mountain West, has a part of their policy is you got to withdraw by I think it's June 1st, the year before. But I think all these exit fee discussions, it's all getting wrapped together into the mediation. So I'm not sure that there's an actual deadline that is applicable. There might be, but I'm not sure there is in terms of the amount that these schools would owe. I think that's being handled by the mediation.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to say. I would have originally said late April, early May, but that was before I think we realized that maybe the mediation was holding things up. So I would say it's going to be maybe a month after the mediation concludes, but we don't know when that's going to be, right? Yeah. They may be done for all we know, and they're just dotting the I's and crossing the T's. But I would give them a few weeks once they solve the mediation to then go out and get that deal locked up and then do the expansion. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think we'll see once the mediation is wrapped, I do think we'll start to see leaks that come out, and we'll start to see reporting that comes out. But right now, everybody's locked down. Everybody's afraid to say anything. They are under orders from the mediator. They have signed documents, non-disclosure documents. I think we'll be able to get this stuff eventually, but I think for right now, there's some severe penalties if some of these people start talking about what's happening in mediation. I keep hearing all this people speculating, could there be a merger happening? No, I don't see a merger happening. I think that the 5 schools that left the Mountain West wanted to leave the Mountain West. I don't think that they're going to come back and go, we want to be alongside Wyoming and San Jose State again. That's not going to happen. I also think, I've been hearing about this, UNLV wants to go to the Big 12. Well, no kidding. In high school, I wanted to take Cindy Crawford to the prom. Like, it's not happening. You want to go to the Big 12. That's great. You can wish and hope and dream about it. But I don't see that happening in this cycle right now. I think if the Big 12 wanted UNLV, I think they would have grabbed them when they had an opportunity to grab a bunch of schools. So I still think, there'll be the idea that all these schools that are not in the Power Four would love to be in the Power Four, including the Pac-12 schools, including UNLV. But I think ultimately the question I have is, does the Pac-12 truly covet UNLV? Is there enough money left behind in the Mountain West to keep UNLV there? What will they do? Will they sit tight?
Yep.
The Pac-12 really only needs one football member, one all sports member. Then it can go out and it can decide if it wants to add some football only schools. Yep. But I think they probably know what they want to do, Wilner. They're probably just waiting for the mediation to get sewed up here. But, I keep looking at UNLV and thinking they just belong in the Pac-12. It makes sense in the Pac-12. But if they don't want to be there, you pivot right to Texas State or somebody like that. You take them and then you try to fill out your scheduling by adding some football only participants.
And there's not going to be movement until the end of the decade, right? I mean, the Big 12 is not adding UNLV in a year or two. And I would imagine that the Pac-12's grant of rights will be timed to expire and give all these schools a chance to go elsewhere at the turn of the decade, when the ACC's grant of rights drops, and we could see a huge wave of realignment. Pac-12 is not going to bind these schools into the mid 2030s because nobody would sign that deal. So I agree with you in terms of UNLV and the Big 12. The thing I keep getting back to, though, with the mediation is, if we use the Pac-10 versus Pac-2 as our guide, right, that took several months, multiple sessions.
Yeah.
And then at the end, they did publicly announce that they had resolved the issue through mediation. So I would imagine at some point there will be a public announcement that the whole thing is concluded, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah. And I also think, like, the expansion and the realignment moves that we saw, Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC, the LA schools to the Big Ten, Oregon and Washington to the Big Ten, they all made sense. Like, there's a no-brainer element to some part of that. This Pac-12 thing, it doesn't have quite the no-brainer feel to it. So I think it's why there's so much murkiness and speculation and if this, then that is going on, because, UNLV, Texas State, maybe the Memphis Tulane contingent playing football. Is there a UTSA possibility in there if you're taking Texas State? I think those are all things we've speculated about, but there isn't a no-brainer out there.
Nope.
Because you have to have this school. Otherwise, you just can't be. I think right now the Pac-12 feels like it's got the number 5 conference. And I was looking back too to, some exchanges I had with Kirk Schultz, the Washington State president, when this all went down, right? When they grabbed the Mountain West school.
Yep.
He made a comment to me. I looked back to my notes. He made a comment to me and he said that, the objective is to create a conference that can compete with the Big 12 and the ACC. They're trying to get close to those two conferences. They can even think about competing with those conferences. I think they're starting to inch there, at least from a football perspective, with the top of the conference. And I think they're thinking like, hey, they're in decent position here to try to, belong in the playoff alongside the Big 12 champion or the ACC champion. But they don't need a desperate move here. They don't need a reach here. And it may just be they make a move to satisfy the NCAA requirement and then see what happens in a year or two.
If there was an obvious school, they would have gotten them last fall, I think. And that's kind of where things stand. I also feel like if there had been a great media deal, they would already have it.
Yeah.
There probably wasn't. And I think the mediation and the uncertainty on the legal front was probably a big factor that they didn't have, a deal that they could not pass up, so to speak.
Yeah. I had an attorney tell me that he thought that one of the reasons why they had not announced a media deal is that in mediation, it would come up that the Mountain West is going to say, hey, look, here are the damages we have. Our media deal, we're getting this much less money because we don't have Boise State, San Diego State, whatever. And look at the deal you got. You took a big spike up. And so it wasn't an advantage to the Pac-12 to have that information out there and available in a potential mediation situation. So It may just be that everything is kind of done, but nothing is really done until it's, it gets signed.
That would suggest that it would be soon after mediation ends. It's interesting what you said about the Pac-12 trying to be the best group of 5, 6 league and inch closer to the ACC and Big Ten, because I have thought about this. Would the new Pac-12 be closer to the Big 12 in, quality of play competition than the Big 12 is to the SEC?
Yes.
And I don't know the answer, but I think
it is.
It's a worthy conversation to have, or certainly will be worthy once the Pac-12's membership is set.
I think with the Big 12 and the ACC have lost sight of the SEC and the Big 10 from the front of their windshield. I think you can get a team in there like Arizona State stayed on the field with Texas, probably could have beat Texas, but I think as a conference, no, and I think that's why all this talk has been coming out about the 4 automatic qualifiers and the bully act that the Big Two are pulling. And but here's another question for you: is the gap between the SEC and the Big 12 bigger or smaller than the gap between the Pac-12 and the next group of 5, like the American? That, I think, is going to become a question when the playoff rankings come around, because would a Pac-12 champion in 2026 that had like a 10-2 or an 11-1 record, would they be ranked higher by the CFP than an American champion with the same record, or maybe even one fewer loss? I think that is going to be a big question in 26.
And that very well could come down to what the non-conference schedule and performance looks like. We saw the rocket fuel that Boise State's close loss at Oregon provided the Broncos all the way through the selection process. So if you're a 10-2 Pac-12 team and one of those losses is, on the road against a Big Ten school, close game, and Memphis doesn't have an equivalent result against a Power 4 school, I think then the edge would go to the Pac-12. There's no doubt about that in my mind. It is interesting, though. I don't think the gap between the new Pac-12 and the American, that is smaller to me than it would be between, say, the new Pac-12 and the Big 12. To me, I think they'd be pretty darn close. The Americans got more schools at the bottom end that aren't competitive, and that gets back to what you mentioned. The Pac-12, they don't want just to add, right? They want to make sure that their strength of schedule in football and basketball is as good as possible, and they don't want dregs.
And that gives me pause on Texas State. I mean, they just have not had sustained football success, and for any stretch, and so that's the pause I have, and that's why UNLV probably looks better to me. Hey, and it's another thing you bring up. You bring up that non-conference schedule. I had Rob Mullins, the Oregon athletic director, on my radio show.
Yeah, that was good.
And he was talking about the Civil War. Now, they're going to play the Civil War against Oregon State this season, and he says he wants to play it. And he believes that it's good for the state, it's good for his school, it's good for Oregon State. But there are some Oregon State fans who don't want to continue the series, and I'm saying, look, you need to continue this series. You get a Big Ten team coming to your stadium every other year. You don't have to get on a plane to play a non-conference game that is a big one for you. And you get an opportunity built into your schedule that Boise State used, as you said, as rocket fuel.
Yep.
An opportunity to play the Ducks and validate yourself and make a case for you to be involved in the playoff. And that's not available to everybody. And so I think you have to continue to do it. There are some problems with the schedule in 2026 and 2027. Partly it's because Oregon is got 3 non-conference schedule games under contract. Oregon State has 4. You can see that the Beavers and the Cougars are both kind of planning, going, are we going to have 8 football schools, 9 football schools? You can see what they're doing in the future by scheduling a little heavy. Also, there's a chance that the Big Ten and the SEC play some crossover games. I think Oregon's kind of waiting to see what happens there.
Yes.
But Mullins says in 26 and 27, it could be problematic to play those games. But beyond that, he wants to play the games. If I'm Oregon State, I play that game. If I'm Oregon, I play that game, because you don't have to get on a plane and go travel. You get a home game. You get it's 40-minute drive. You get, there's a lot of advantages for both schools there.
Washington State fans, there's a faction of Washington State fans that don't want to continue the Apple Cup because they're upset at the Huskies. And it's the same thing. You got to play that game if you're Washington State, and you got to play that game if you're Oregon State.
Yeah.
There's just no doubt about it. And I think agree. The administrations of both schools smart enough to recognize that.
I agree. Let's pivot a little bit into the wrangling going on with the CFP, SEC talking. A lot of bluster going on about, hey, we didn't get enough teams into the playoff. It was political. Greg Sankey out there. You have Tony Petitti saying, that they support, having a bigger piece of the pie. You've got the Big 12 and the ACC commissioners issuing jointish statements about the good of the game. They say they weren't coordinated, but they sure looked coordinated, and I didn't mind it. Start with that, Wilner. Does the SEC and the Big Ten have a obligation for the good of the game?
There's so much to unpack with this. every commissioner and every conference is out primarily for their own best interest. That is what college football is all about, is self-interest. That's why we're here, and that is never going to go away unless there's a commissioner that has the authority to make decisions for the collective. The conferences are going to move in their own self-interest, and they're going to say that what they want is for the good of the game. And in some cases, it will be, but in some cases, it won't be. And what's good for the SEC and the Big Ten may not be good for everybody else at this point when it comes to CFP access. So just to catch people up, starting in 2026, there's a blank slate for the playoff. They want to add and expand to 16 teams. The question is, how do you provide access? One option is automatic bids, 4 to the SEC and Big Ten, 2 to the ACC and Big 12, 1 to the group of 6. The other option is 5 automatic bids to the conference champions and 11 at large. So the question is, which is better for the Big 12 or the ACC? And you can make the case both ways. But those are the two models that they're looking at. The Big Ten clearly favors a model where they get 4 automatic bids every year. SEC has not been, I think, not quite as forceful privately about that. But those are the two models they're considering.
I look at the NFL, and Roger Goodell's league gets it. The owners in the NFL don't look at each other and go, I need to cut your throat to better my business position. No, they look around at the other owners in the league and they go, hey, we're in partnership here. How do we work together to build this thing into what it is and keep sustaining it and keep growing it? And every decision that the NFL makes has what's best for the sport and best for the league at heart. It's buried in it with revenue sharing and the way they draft and free agency. And hey, we're going to play games in Europe. And here's the schedule release. Everything is about the good of the game. And so for any of these commissioners to come out and say, oh, I'm here and I'm charged with making good decisions, not just what's good for the game. I'm just trying. It's nonsense. It's bullshit. Like, you have to have what's good for the game at heart. Otherwise, the business is competing against itself. And that's what we're seeing with the Big Ten and the SEC. Of course, they're going to get more teams in the playoff. They're better funded. They've got a running start. It is inherent in the system that they're going to end up with 4 or 5 teams in the playoff, even if there's no guarantee. And so I don't think there's any sport in America, any professional sport, that would adhere to a system that's guaranteed the Yankees and the Dodgers access to the playoffs every year. Or, look at the NBA. You've got Minnesota playing Oklahoma City in the Western Conference Finals, and it's being celebrated by a lot of small markets as, look at the NBA. It finally got with parity, and it got with, and college football needs to get there too.
But though the pros are collectives, right? They're sharing media revenue. College, they are competing against themselves because each conference has its own media deal. The CFP is shared, and there's certainly lots of conflict there. But the bulk of the revenue that comes into each of these conferences every year is through their own media deals that are separate from everybody else's. So the very nature of the system creates conflict. Yeah. And, you could argue that eventually a super league, everybody would have shared interest. But right now it's set up like, a steel cage match in a lot of ways. And right now with the CFP, the Big Ten and the SEC are the biggest kids on the block, and they're arm in arm, and they don't really seem to care that much about what is best for the other conferences. The other issue is that they're talking about the scheduling series, right? And this is where decisions made at the top of the food chain really trickle down. If the SEC and Big Ten do this crossover series where you have one non-conference game against the other league every year, they're not going to have any reason to schedule non-conference games against the Big Ten, against the Big 12 or the ACC or the new Pac-12 or the Mountain West, right? They're going to want the rest of their schedules to be as bad as possible. So all of a sudden, Alabama's supposed to go to Arizona in like 2030. If they're playing Ohio State or whoever, Wisconsin, why would they continue that game?
Yeah.
So there's a huge ripple effect potentially if the two conferences create this schedule series.
And I'm looking at 18 teams in the Big Ten and 16 in the SEC. And I would seriously love to know what Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey would say to this. Part of why the BCS didn't work and the 2-team playoff didn't work is it eliminated large portions of the country. Fans felt disenfranchised, alienated. Your team wasn't participating. Team didn't have a chance. There were entire time zones where we were just like, hey, you haven't played in this game in years. And so if they continue down this path, look, I looked at their states, like we're talking about like 27 states that would not participate. There's going to be a problem there. And it's why, like, we had Mike Oresco on our show, the former American commissioner, and he said they got Darwinian in their approach.
Yeah.
And he said it was really different. Like they used to be collegial. It used to be friendly. All of a sudden it was survival of the fittest when it came to negotiating the CFP deal.
And I still think that if the ACC and Big 12 had joined with us, our 64 schools, to fight for a little more equity in the CFP, that we could have prevailed. That's 100 schools, but they didn't want to do it. I think they were concerned that the SEC and the Big 10 would leave. I've been quoted as saying, I never believed that would happen. I just don't believe they'll do it because I think their presidents would come under enormous pressure. I think they get hauled before Congress. I think they would be accused of wrecking a national championship and being selfish and going off on their own. I just don't think it would have happened. But yes, their strength now is a real concern. It's not that they don't have able leaders and they're friends. They've been friends of mine for a long time. That's not the issue. The issue is it's become Darwinian. I mean, they really threw their weight around in this whole CFP process, and we just didn't have enough leverage to fight it.
If the Big Ten and the SEC are going to try to take their ball and go home, I think, Wilner, the time is now for the Big 12 and the ACC and the 64 group of 5 schools. I think they have to stand ground now and go, look, if you're really trying to lock us out of this, here's where we put our foot down. We're not going to agree to any of this unless it's more equitable. And you talk about TV money, you're right. We're talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars over the lengths of these contracts. The CFP distributions are no better. You've got $21 million per school going to the SEC and the Big Ten, and you've got $1.8 million going to a group of 5 schools, and Oregon State, Washington State getting 3.6 and 14 million and 12 million to the ACC and Big 12. It's not an equitable playing field. There's no greater good that is being considered here. And I'm embarrassed for some of these commissioners who say that the greater good isn't their job. It is their job, because when 27 states say, I'm not going to watch, then where are you as a sport? That to me is a problem.
It is, but the commissioners are doing what their presidents and their boards are telling them to do, and everybody is looking for the most amount of money. And this gets back to off the field stuff, litigation, right? These schools are looking at $20.5 million in revenue sharing with the athletes that's going to kick in July 1st, assuming that lawsuit gets approved, the settlement gets approved. So if you're Mississippi or if you're Wisconsin, you say, where's the $20.5 million? And so you tell your commissioner, get us more money. And the way for the Big Ten and the SEC to get more money is to create more inventory, college football playoff inventory, not necessarily. Regular season inventory, yes. And so everything they're doing is based on getting more money to pay for this lawsuit.
Yeah, I cringe at the idea of throwing away the entire sport while trying to see if you can become the NFL light. And
it's not like the NFL gives the AFC South two playoff spots every year before the season starts. That would be the equivalent of these AQs. The AFC South gets 2 spots in the playoffs no matter what.
You have to leave room in any playoff system for outliers. It's why the NCAA tournament works so well. It's why the Major League Baseball with the extra wild cards feels so fun, and the NFL feels a little wide open come playoff time. There's room in these systems for outliers. If you lock up 8 of the 16 bids between the Big Ten and the SEC before the season starts. You haven't played a game yet. You haven't even had a practice yet. We don't know if you're any good.
Yeah.
And you have 4 teams in the playoff. It flies in the face of competition, and it doesn't leave room for Boise State and maybe another group of 5 school to punch above their weight. And it doesn't leave room for a great story in the ACC or the Big 12 and Kenny Dillingham and Arizona State and somebody else. Maybe Utah is really good. Doesn't leave room for anybody else. And so I think it really detracts from what you're trying to do. My hope would be that the commissioners in those 2 conferences, that maybe this is just a little bit of saber rattling and they're just trying to make a case like, hey, if we don't get what we want, if we don't get our teams into the playoff, then, we're going to really pursue this in future deals. But if they are threatening to take their ball and go home, I think it's time for the Big 12 and the ACC to make a stand.
Well, we should know. I would think we'll know a lot more this summer because we're talking about the format for the 2026 season. They got to get it done quick. And a lot hinges on it because the SEC, whether they add a 9th conference game in 2026, depends on this whole playoff thing. And so they've been talking about this for years and they haven't gotten anywhere. And it seems like they're further apart now than they were 2 years ago. But hopefully we'll know this summer.
Well, stay tuned and make sure that you comment, subscribe, and share this videocast and podcast with your friends and family. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode.
Thanks, everybody.